Wow. How do I follow sausage rolls? I'm not sure. So, Noel Harris, Director of Customer Success. Thanks to the deep-voiced individual at the back. Hi. What I wanted to talk to you about today is a topic that everyone seems to be talking about at the moment. The whole messaging space. So, 12 months ago, it was all around AI, VA, chatbots. That was the hot topic. This year, it's all about messaging and how we as individuals cope with it. So, over the next hour and a half, I'll try and rattle through things. I'm joking, it's only 20 minutes. Because I am that man that stands between you guys and maybe some sausage rolls. I'm not sure. So over the next 20 minutes or so, we'll walk through some of the key areas associated with messaging. So the fact that messaging is a growing industry, predominantly driven by consumerization, actually. Why is it growing? Some of the human factors associated with messaging and the choices that consumers have that we as business owners need to be set up in order to cope and manage. And some of the problems that presents us through this consumerization. So how are we going to cope with it? So, first fact, 3rd of December, 1992. So 26 years ago, the first ever SMS was sent from an engineer in Newbury to a director within Vodafone. 3rd of December. And that message read, "Merry Christmas." They were clearly in the camp that anything post-Halloween is build up to Christmas. So good luck to them. The second interesting fact is you don't need a data network in order to send an SMS. So if you're unfortunate and you have an accident out in the wilds camping, you could send an SMS to get help and support. Just don't send one that says Merry Christmas. You may be waiting. So, messaging is a volume business. 15 million text messages are sent every minute worldwide. Facebook and WhatsApp are approximately 3 times that size. That's 42 million messages are sent every minute. So combined, that's almost 1 million messages every single second. So as consumers, this is a channel that is massively growing. And the question that we need to ask ourselves is, are we able to support this growing channel? So, I will get home from the conference, I will walk in the house, I'll walk upstairs, and I guarantee my 12-year-old son will be sat on the PlayStation. Next to him, he'll have his laptop open, watching a video invariably about the game he's playing. Next to that, he'll have his mobile phone, and he's frantically messaging his friends while he's doing all that. That's 3 devices at the same time. I work in digital. I struggle with one. So good luck to him. But he is very much a digital native. I'll go downstairs to get a cup of coffee, and I will probably get a message. He won't call me. He won't come downstairs. He'll send me a message, and it'll fall into one of 2 camps. Feed me or give me money. Anyone with kids will understand that. But in terms of messages, 7,700% increase in the last decade. That's huge. Now, I don't know whether you sit in the creationist or evolutionist camp, but tens of thousands of years ago, Humans evolved with a focal length out there that allowed them to see what they were hunting and see what was hunting them. Imagine what we're going to look like in 10,000 years. Focal length of a foot with very agile thumbs. The other factor is around age. So this is a survey that was done on US adults. And effectively, it looked at, on average, the amount of messages that were sent all throughout the day or throughout the month based on the different age sectors. And it's no surprise that the millennials are the ones that are driving this change. 50% of American adults aged 18 to 24 said that text conversations are just as meaningful as a phone call. As a species, are we losing the ability to interact face to face? 33% of American adults prefer text to all other forms of communication. So, lifestyle. This is driving the growth in the channel. So if you think about Gen Y, Gen Z individuals, the digital natives, they are very focused on some key areas. Has anyone ever read The Effortless Experience by the CEB? If you haven't, it's a fascinating read. So the key takeouts from the analysis that they did, where they actually interviewed a whole raft of consumers, was that businesses historically focused on driving exceptional customer service. You know, every business that I've ever worked in, and I suspect it's the same for you guys, it's all about the customer experience. Well, for Gen Ys, Gen Zs, these individuals, the most important thing actually is their time. So I don't want to get into a complex conversation. I have a particular issue. I want it resolved as quickly as possible, and then I want to get back to my life. I'm not bothered about the exceptional service. Resolve it first time. Let me get about my business. And those individuals will choose how they spend that time. But they are very direct and to the point in terms of conversations. So if I think back a number of years, I first started running web chat teams, good grief, probably about 10, 12 years ago, a number of years ago. And historically, it was all on the website. Great solution. You know, it drove satisfaction improvements over traditional channels. It was more productive than traditional channels like voice or email. And actually, for the individuals on a web chat, they were quite comfortable having a longer conversation, talking about multiple issues, simply because on web chat, they're doing other things. I'm shopping for shoes. I'm looking at Facebook. So from a customer experience perspective, as long as the average response time between conversational lines, was at or around 30 seconds, it didn't impact the experience. What we started to see with chat from the mobile device, because it behaves a lot more like voice, it's one-on-one communication. It's difficult to tab between applications when you're chatting from a mobile device. So what we started to see is that consumers viewed it as a very transactional interaction, but they expected a quicker response time. It was about 50%, around 15 seconds for chat from the mobile device before it started to materially impact the experience. And that continues into messaging, that consumers view it as a very transactional interaction. Have an issue, I want it resolved, and I want it resolved in my time. The other thing is that when we start to talk about asynchronous messaging, for me, there's no real difference between synchronous and asynchronous messaging. There really isn't. It's a function of cadence. It's about response time. So, what consumers expect in the messaging space is, someone explained it to me, which I think is a really good analogy. It's fire and forget. You know, I'll fire an issue in, I'll put my phone or device away, and then I'm off, doing my own thing. But I expect, when I pick that device back up, to have a response. Because I'm the one who's in control. I'm the one that's driving this communication. I do not want to wait. So, I had a very interesting experience personally. A particular quad play supplier in the UK. I won't name names in case they're here. I apologise if you are. But I went onto the website. Now, I always gravitate towards web chat. Now, I do that because I've set up and run very, very large web chat organisations. It's my preferred channel, but it wasn't available. So I thought, you know what, I'll try this new messaging thing that they'd gone big bang with. So I went on there and fired a message in and said, here's my problem, help. A number of hours later, I got a message back, effectively asking me to confirm who I was, because it was an account-specific thing, which I did. A number of hours later, I then got a response coming back saying, what's your query about? And I was like, hang on a sec, I've already done that. And, okay, fine, I'll do it again. The following day, because it had clearly reached the end of the operational hours for the individuals working, I got a message back saying, can you confirm who you are? Go through DPA again. I went through this loop 3 times. In the end, I turned around and said, you know what, don't bother. I called the voice centre and it was resolved within 5 minutes. I will not be using that channel again. Messaging is really important and it's growing, but it is very, very easy to get it very, very wrong. The other thing about messaging is it's an open pipe into the contact centre. So essentially, I've opened that communication line and I will keep it open as long as I choose. So, consumers can go through and discuss multiple issues over a long period of time. So, from a traditional contact centre space, voice, very easy to manage. Easy to manage because we knew what the handle time was. We knew broadly what the repeat time was. We knew what the FCR metrics were. So we had all of these values that allowed me as a contact centre owner to allocate resource to cope with the expected demand. Peaks and troughs and external factors aside, the reality is I can allocate resource, and because I know the cost to do that, I can work out the cost to manage that function. Very easy. Similarly with web chat, exactly the same. I know the chat length, I know the concurrency, I know the chats per hour, I know what the resource costs, so I can work out how much it costs me to service the demands that I'm either creating proactively or managing reactively. So I can do all that. In messaging, there are new considerations. How do you measure FCR on a function that's got no end point, that could go on forever? It's challenging. How do you measure chat length for the messaging function? Because it's individual lines over a period of time. So the analogy that I would use with messaging, anyone ever seen the old black and white movies where, you know, it's a war film and the captain's there and he's going, "Oh, full power." And then he'll open the pipe to shout down to the guys in the engine room saying, "I need more," and then a voice will come back and say, "I'm giving it all I've got, Captain." So that's what messaging is. It's a direct pipe into your organisation. So technology choices are also driving growth. So smartphones, they allow you to use voice. They give you access to websites where I can go and then I have to look for a chat and potentially start it, but that takes effort. There are apps with some messaging capability, but all phones have text messaging. They do. It's pre-installed. And companies are getting quite smart around the raw text messaging capability. So if you text from an iOS device to an iOS device and you put a phone number in, you can highlight it because it's hyperlinked, you can call the number or you can save it to your contacts. Similarly with locations. You can send a location, I click on it, it opens up the maps. So there is some capability that the providers of the handsets are starting to build in to enhance that experience. But consumers have app fatigue. Analysis says that on average, consumers will use 6 to 10 apps regularly. The rest will be sporadic use and invariably will end up getting deleted because they're not being used. There's another set of analysis that says it's around 20, but I suspect that includes a business use case, so some of the apps that we may use within our business lives. But the reality is that headless messaging is prevailing. This is the non-structured messaging without an obvious app integration. So, we touched on it a little bit earlier. Consumerization is forcing business change. So, as a consumer, we've already seen that messaging is growing significantly. And messaging is how consumers choose to communicate with friends and family. But actually, consumers have said that messaging is how I choose to communicate, full stop. 89% of consumers want to use messaging to communicate with businesses, but are we set up to cope? So, some of the key business challenges. Only 48% of businesses are currently equipped to handle any form of messaging. Now, I spend a lot of time with businesses, and you'll tend to find single-point solutions that have been developed to cope with the demand, but don't have the enterprise wrap that sits around it that allows us to understand the performance, to measure what's happening within a contact centre environment. So, social. You'll go out there, and I've seen a number of customers using TweetDeck. It's brilliant, you know, for what it does, but what it doesn't give you is the KPIs, the SLAs, the reporting that sits around it that any contact centre needs in order to drive incremental improvements and understand the impact to the business. 61% of businesses wish they could send and receive text from a business number. So what that says to me is businesses recognise the need but are not sure how they're going to move forward with it. So, why is it hard? The lowest common denominator for any conversation is raw text. But the reality is, how do you allocate an SLA or a governance wrap around a text conversation? The other issue, as I've said earlier, with the particular quad player that I interacted with, it was abundantly clear that that conversation was not threaded. So what I mean by threaded is, every time it went through to an agent, they weren't seeing the context. So as a consumer, through that channel, it drove me to a particularly poor experience where it could have been a lot better if the agent understood what had gone on before. The other issue is that within any contact centre, be it chat or be it voice or email, you have an associated workflow that allows you to segment and point those contacts to the most appropriately skilled individual to be able to resolve first time. Cadence. So what is the right level? The reality is that for consumers, as we've said earlier, the most important thing for them is their time. It's a fire and forget mentality within the messaging space. So I send a message in, I put my phone away, but when I come back and I pick my phone back up, I expect a response to be there. If it's not, I'm annoyed, because that's my time. Now, it took me all of that time to take the phone out and look at it and then put it back, but it's still time. And that drives dissatisfaction. Now, what we're building into the product set, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later, or if you get the opportunity, go to the demo stations, are service levels around messaging. So you can start to match the cadence of the messages coming in. So if you've got a customer that sent a message in 24 hours ago, you respond, and then it's another 24 hours, that is a lower priority than a consumer who comes back in 5 minutes. So we're looking at matching that cadence based on the speed that's being driven by the consumer. Maintaining consistency across channels. So if any of you have had the opportunity to go and look at the desktop, if you haven't, please do so. Because with the Advisor desktop, you have the ability to understand all the contacts customers have made through all of the channels. So the advisors, when they're managing those contacts, can see all of the history regardless of the channel that they've come through. The other interesting one is agent skill set. So when I set a very large web chat organisation up out in India, we went through a number of iterations around recruitment for the agents. When we first went live, we thought, right, web chat. It's written communication, so we'll recruit a load of people that have got email experience, which we did. And that worked okay. It worked better than recruiting voice advisors into a written communication, but that's a different debate. But we went through a number of iterations. So further on, we started recruiting people with domain expertise. So it was the telco space. So we would recruit people with telco experience because they'd be able to understand the processes at a very broad level. We will give them the additional skill set around our individual products and we're good to go. We then ran a trial where we started recruiting individuals that had no domain expertise but had chat expertise. And what we found was the competency glide path for those individuals was about 50% of the individuals that had domain expertise but no chat experience. So, in terms of recruitment profiles and how we get the right agents in, messaging would be something that we need to look at in terms of a skill set. So frankly, recruit any Gen Y, Gen Z individual, you'll be okay. I'm being a little flippant, but it is a consideration. And how do you maintain agent experience through this channel? You've got to give them the right tools, you've got to give them the context in order to succeed. So, business opportunities. Texting is the highest rated contact method for customer sat compared to all other channels. Customers love it. It's also worth noting that a voice call in the UK will cost several pounds to manage, fully loaded cost. Whereas a text conversation costs pennies. So you've got a channel that consumers want, you've got a channel that drives the highest satisfaction levels, and you have a channel that costs the least amount to manage. So why are we waiting? eGain can already cope. So over a number of years, we've built a number of products up that are all integrated with our core platform. So we can support email, secure messaging, Facebook messaging, Twitter, video chat, web chat, and SMS. And all of that is underpinned by our platform that gives the advisors access to knowledge in AI, threading, so context, routing, and the analytics to manage against all of the SLAs. And we can do much, much more. So, it's a very complicated diagram. I'll give you a scenario. So once we integrate with a messaging platform through our APIs, let's say Facebook, for example, the customer comes through the channel and fires a message in. We then consume that message and run it through the AI intent interface. That then routes that contact to the most appropriate channel in order to resolve as quickly as possible, respecting customers' time as a key priority. So let's take a telco example. Customer comes in and they're interested in a new mobile phone. So they send the message in, it goes through the AI intent mechanism, the interface. It's then escalated seamlessly and elegantly into our AI chatbot. That then goes through some Q&A and realises that it needs to ask some more detailed questions, so it escalates to our guided help capability. That then goes through a series of diagnostic and questions, and it gets to the point where it realises it needs to escalate to a human being. All of this through the Facebook interface. So at this point, it's handing over to a real agent. They then complete the nuts and bolts associated with the sale, but at the end of the sale, they've got some FCA statements, compliance statements that they need to go through. At this point, the agent can pass it back to the AI chatbot in order to complete the statements and resolve that query. Now, that whole end-to-end experience could last a number of weeks, could last a day. You know, the difference between synchronous and asynchronous is cadence. That's it. The speed of the responses. It's the same interaction. Interestingly, historically, we tended as contact centre leaders to look at contacts with either high value, low value, failure demand. We'd start to bucket contacts at an end-to-end level. The reality is that individual contacts have phases. So if you think about the analogy, if you're ever unfortunate enough to have to go to hospital for an operation, you will have the anaesthetist who puts you under. Then he or she hands you over to the junior doctor who will slice and dice and cut you open and bring the appropriate bits out. At that point, they'll then hand you over to a senior doctor. They will come around and they'll do all their magic before they hand back to the junior doctor, to the anaesthetist, to bring you round to the nurse who will take you back to the recovery. So that was one process, or a number of processes, one thing that happened to that particular individual with different phases within it. So no longer do we look at contacts as high value or low value, it's a contact with different phases. And we have the capability to deliver that right now. If you have any other questions, please feel free to go to the demo centres. I believe the asynchronous is in the CX area. So if you go and have a chat with those guys, or grab me, then we can have a debate around how this type of technology could support your business to support your customers. Thank you. Lunch.